Let's say Bezos against Stalin.
Unquestionably Stalin.
You really believe
Unquestionably. Well, yeah, Mao's an incredibly important figure.
Come on, we can't be that naive.
In this video, we are going to watch a full-blown communist professor try and defend some of history's most heinous dictators on the Valuetainment podcast with Patrick Bet-David. There is a lot for me to unpack here, guys, so let's get into the clips.
I want to read the tweet, and
go ahead.
You can unpack it. So people...
You're not just going to read the initial one, right? You're going to read the whole thread.
It's a long one, so I'm going to go through the whole thing. You tell me when to stop, I'll stop. So people say I idolize Stalin. Not true. I hold a fair and balanced view. The man was neither a savior nor saint, but he was at once a very successful revolutionary, a great contributor to Marxist theory, and said to be a great listener and collaborator during discussions. And then there are his successes as a leader. First, the foresight to fear a belligerent German fascism, then the tactical ability to successfully defeat the world's greatest invading army, combined with the strength to make tough decisions that have no easy answers. I simply think one should read everything the man wrote and then make up your own mind. I would certainly conclude that he is one of the great leaders of the 20th century, though. So that's what you said, if you don't mind unpacking that.
I wrote this knowing that this would probably be somewhat, let's say, triggering, right?
Sure.
We are taught in the United States because of anti-communist propaganda. We're taught that Stalin is just an appalling monster, and there's not a single thing that he did that was good. And this is utter nonsense. We look at the achievements of the Soviet Union, and what we find is that the Soviet Union improved the lives of ordinary people more rapidly than any state has ever done in history. Now, that's a remarkable achievement. So we're talking about two things here, right? First, we're talking about a massive expansion in the size of the economy, right? And when I say that, I'm talking about conventional measurements. I'm talking about GDP, right? Now, there are some differences in terms of how GDP is reckoned in socialist countries and so forth. Let's just leave that aside, right? The fact is that socialism under Stalin massively grew the economy more than at any other point in Russian history, right? So that's one thing. Now, the second thing, GDP doesn't mean that much, though, in terms of how the average person is doing, right? Because the size of the economy can grow, and we have no idea, where does that wealth go, right? Does it go to a small number of people? I mean, that's typically the pattern, right? Typically, Marx said, right, the history of hitherto existing society is a history of class struggle. That means a small group of people tends to take the lion's share of the wealth of an economy, and this is going back thousands of years, right? Did that happen in the Soviet Union? The answer is absolutely not, right? The wealth went towards improving the average person's life and especially towards improving the lives of the very poorest. It's a huge mistake and a huge distortion to allow the anti-communists, most of whom, by the way, are Nazis, to write this history.
So first of all, Pat Bet-David is a good interviewer because he actually reads the tweets that the professor said rather than trying to just strawman his argument and frame him, because that would be pretty easy to do here. And Dr. Bear is correct. Stalin did bring the Soviet Union from a country of peasants to a global superpower. But the human rights record along the way was what's a bit fishy here. But also, let's not forget that the 20th century was a time for enormous development and industrialization for countries around the world, so it wasn't amazingly unique what they were doing. Stalin developed 3 different 5-year plans to rapidly industrialize the Soviet Union. He set massive targets for coal, oil, steel, and electricity production, and any workers that didn't hit those targets, it didn't end so well for them. Another aspect of Stalin's plan was to collectivize the farmland of the Soviet Union. And to do this, he had to seize this land from the peasants that had been given the land by Lenin and reorganize them into collective farms. And it goes without saying that these peasants weren't overly happy about this, and many of them resisted. And the way that resistance was met was that they were either tortured, exiled, or killed. And these peasants were named as kulaks, which means profiteers or exploiters. This land seizure led to a rather predictable result, which is that crop yields would drop precipitously in 1931 and 32 because they'd gotten rid of all the productive farmers, which of course led to a massive famine which killed about 6 million people in the Ukraine and then many more across the USSR. But despite this famine, which is known as Holodomor, Stalin didn't really help his people out very much. A part of the plan to industrialize meant that they still had to sell grain to other countries, which he continued to do whilst his people were starving. And like I said, it's not like every single thing that he ever did was absolutely terrible. And sure, the Soviet Union certainly came a long way in that time. However, all of the horror and death and famine and gulags, they really weren't that necessary. You would have been a lot better off making the same progress but in a capitalistic way, like we've seen with so many other countries around the world. Stick around, guys, because the best is yet to come. But if you do get value from this content, and if you want to help me out with my algorithms, chuck a thumbs up on the video, leave me a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on all notification bells.
Here's the question, right? Does the wealth that you have, even if you're at the 85th percentile or whatever, right? Even if you're sort of near the top of the income distribution under capitalism, does it allow you to stop working and do whatever you want, right? Imagine if you could do whatever you thought would make you the most happy and be of the greatest benefit to humanity, right? Does it allow you to do that? The answer is no, absolutely not. Does it allow you to do that, right?
Do you think it's the choice of the individual on how they spend their money? And do you think there are people that are better with their money than versus those who are not good with their money on how they spend their money? Some have good habits, some have bad habits, right? Like when you say, I'm a PhD and you're making good income, you earned the right to do that. You went and got your PhD. I think whatever you're making, whether it's 120, 150, 200, I haven't looked up your income. If you have the discipline to go, I haven't looked up your income, but if you have the discipline,
you can look it up later.
Yeah, but if you have the discipline to go get a PhD and you are a thought leader professor, if the market pays you good money, more power to you. But I think that's more based on the choice of the individual on how they spend their money.
I think it's sort of cruel to tell everyone, hey, listen, we've got to cross this river. 9 of you are going to make it. 1 of you is going to drown. Good luck. Like,
yeah, but
wow,
maybe you could say, look, you kind of eat a little too much and you put on too much weight. Maybe discipline yourself a little bit so you can have stamina a little bit more. You can say, what's wrong with us saying, look, instead of watching Netflix all day and playing video games, maybe spend that same amount of time learning a new skill set so the market could increase your value. Is there anything wrong with that? Is that cruel?
I think it's unrealistic.
Why do you say that?
Because we need to look at the fact it's like musical chairs, right? Musical chairs, the whole point of the game is there's not enough chairs, right? It wouldn't be much of a game if when the music stopped, everybody had a place to sit down.
That's a game, though. Right? That's a game.
That's a game.
Sure.
But our economy is not that different from musical chairs, right? I mean, like, there's always going to be millions of people unemployed. I mean, we can look at the lowest unemployment figures in the series, right? And what does it translate into? It translates into several million people unemployed. I mean, that's just the reality, Every 1% of unemployment is 1.6 million people or thereabouts, right? So you always have millions of people unemployed even in the richest capitalist nations. You just hope it's not you, right? You just hope that you hustle hard enough and it's not you. I call that cruel. Yes, absolutely, that's cruel. Because we are saying, look, somebody always has to suffer.
Guess what? I got a person here that's my camera girl. She didn't like working at Amazon. She said, I didn't want to work there. It didn't treat me good. She left. No one's forced to stay there. In communism, you don't have a choice. It's pure force. In capitalism, if you work for a shitty boss or a shitty company, you can leave them to go to a different place. You can do that in capitalism. You cannot do that in communism.
Yeah, but what's your fallback, right? Let's say you don't have the money to leave a job, Let's say you don't have any savings because you're a low-wage worker, right? Sure. Why are you a low-wage worker? Well, you don't have much skills. Why? Well, because you come from a poor family, Education wasn't available to you. Yeah. Acquiring skills wasn't available to you. Now, this is true for a substantial portion.
Generally speaking, and obviously barring extreme circumstances, to be unemployed in a capitalist developed Western nation is a choice. There are so many different things you could do, so many skills that you could learn, and so much need for talent out there. Unfortunately, it's just a reality of the world that there are a lot of people out there who are just lazy, and the market rewards them accordingly. And I worked full-time at the Salvation Army for 2 years at a homeless shelter, so I've seen this up close, and I know very well that there are people who just have the most unbelievably unfortunate circumstances, and people who for that reason just never stood a chance in life. But there are also a lot of people who just make terrible choices over and over and over and over again. And furthermore, if you guys have heard of the Pareto principle, it's a law of nature that in this case would suggest that wealth is always concentrated at the top. To those who have everything, more will be given, and from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. Evidence suggests that societies will always kind of organize themselves according to this principle. But the beauty is, but in the West, we've created a system where even the people at the bottom have iPhones and flat screen TVs, and we have social safety nets, which means that they will never go hungry. In the USSR, though, they were all starving to death.
Let's just say right now, we got a 22-year-old kid that's watching this conversation. You and I are talking. Let's call him John. Okay, let's call him Jose. He's watching this video, and he's sitting there saying, okay, doctor's got a degree. He's a PhD. Patrick had a 1.8 GPA in high school. He doesn't have a degree. He doesn't have an 8-year, not an MBA, not a PhD, not a 4-year, not an associate. He just went in the military, came out, went into business, and he's done well for himself in business. Fine. This kid that's watching this has the choice and the capacity to go be the next Bezos and build the next Amazon, hypothetically. And he's in there where he has that kind of drive and intellect to be able to pull it off, right? The 22-year-old Bezos named Jose, okay? If he goes and does this in the next 20 years, Doc, he's going to create 1.3 million jobs, which is roughly what Amazon employs today. They got 1.3 million jobs. That means they created the market 1.3 million jobs. Or he can choose to go out there and become a major loyalist to Marxist and communistic philosophies, go into school, become a professor, and educate people on why capitalism is cruel and it's not the right system. Who's living more of a worthier life? The guy that gives 20 years to build an incredible company that creates 1.3 million jobs, or the guy that goes out there and says capitalism sucks and communism is the way to go? Who's making their purpose become a reality?
I think if we're dreaming, I would like to see the Marxist figure be more of a revolutionary, actually.
Fine. Let's say he's a revolutionary. Let's say Bezos against Stalin.
Yeah. Well, which one improved more people's lives? You gonna ask me this?
100%.
The answer is unquestionably Stalin.
You really believe
unquestionably?
You really believe that?
Oh, absolutely. It's not even close. Not even close. Now look,
kidding
generating 1.3 million jobs is not the unambiguous good that you're making it sound like, right? The question is, what's the nature? The question is, what's the nature of those jobs, right? I could create 1 million internships for you right now.
Okay.
They're unpaid, right? I just created 1 million jobs.
Boom. Paid jobs.
Oh, they do pay jobs, right?
Yeah.
Imagine if my internships were also paid. They're just paid at a starvation level of wages, right? Is that a net improvement?
These are not starvation paid jobs, though. You know, when Amazon,
that's not what the Amazon workers say, is it? You know?
Well, no, the people, listen, the part that you're right is when the complaints come about breaks, and other people have said that, right? But if we have to choose between the two, you're saying without a debate, Stalin would be better for the world than a Bezos.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the historical record is very, very clear on that, right?
Wow.
Now, look, how long were people living in the Soviet Union under the Tsar, right? The life expectancy in the Soviet Union was about 40 years, right?
Yeah.
So this is an average figure, all right? So what it means is, let's take everybody who died, okay, and just put in their age, okay? You died at 6 months, okay, we'll put in 0.5. If you died at 80, we put in 80, okay? Died at 40, put in 40, all right? The average of all those numbers, okay, that is unbelievable, right? And that shows you that this is a pretty brutal society, okay? So Stalin improved that by about 30 years, right? This is almost a doubling in life expectancy, and this occurred in a very short period of time.
Millions of people. He killed millions of people.
Let's not deflect, right? Let's just say what happened, right?
This guy is a typical apologist and can only see the Soviet Union through rose-colored glasses. And Amazon has its issues, and Jeff Bezos' morals could certainly be questioned in many ways. But the man has created over 1 million jobs, and he's made it so much easier for everybody worldwide to get consumer goods. So to have issues with him is fair enough, but to compare him to Stalin is completely absurd. There are many different numbers, but it's thought that on the low end, Stalin was responsible for about 40 million deaths of his own people due to internal repression alone. And just to let you know a few more things that he oversaw. He oversaw the formation of the NKVD, which was his own secret police. They were responsible for unimaginable amounts of murder, suffering, and torture. He was responsible for setting up many different gulags, which were hard labor, forced labor camps, and many of them were actually in the unlivable conditions in Siberia. Under his direct orders, 5,000 prisoners were also sent to a place called Nazino Island, and with serious food shortages, within weeks, 4,000 of them had been claimed by exposure, murder, going missing, drowning, and even being eaten by the other prisoners. Look that one up if you want to go down a dark wormhole. And guys, if you're interested in these sorts of topics, then make sure to sign up to my email list, pinned in the top of the comments there, www.rattlesnaketv.com. I'm always sending out different books, movies, even documentary recommendations. You'll absolutely love it.
Communism is pure slavery. I mean, that's the system is...
Well, no, now we're just mixing up terms, right?
Communism is purely slavery.
If you ask 1,000 workers under capitalism, right? Even in the United States, just ask everyone, do you think everybody should have a job?
Do you realize right now?
I think you're going to get pretty strong agreement on that.
David is sitting right here. He's a camera guy, okay?
Yeah.
And he runs production. If David right now comes and tells me, screw you, Patrick, you're the worst boss ever, and he leaves me, what can I do to him?
David, I don't want you to get fired here.
What I'm trying to tell you is, what can I honestly do to David? What can I do to you? Nothing. He gets up and walks out. If in a communistic regime, he comes and puts his finger at the boss and says, screw you, where the hell are you going? What's going to happen to this guy? Poor guy may go missing. We may not find him. By the way, let's just say David works for me. And he goes on.
Well, we don't find that historically, though. We don't find that. That's not true.
I mean, just 40 million people got killed. It's not that many people. Let's just not, it's just.
Yeah, but that's not a true number, though.
It's probably 60 million. You're right. It's more like 60 million. It's a bigger number.
No, neither of those numbers are accurate.
You know what I appreciate about you is the following. Here's what I appreciate about you is you have your own thoughts on believing the data that a Stalin's regime would give you to say that's the data on how things got better. For somebody that is an intellect like you, who's read way more books than I have and knows history probably a lot more than I do, that's the world you're in. That's the sport you're playing, right? That's why I'm interviewing you and I have you on to get your perspective on it.
Sure. But let me ask you this. Yeah. Does not every government have similar motivations to lie about the numbers? I mean, doesn't the United States have similar motivations to make itself look good by lying about the numbers?
But the only difference we have here's the only difference.
Remember who charged this? Trump did. When Trump was running and he made a lot of hay out of this, he said, the official unemployment rate is nonsense. The unemployment rate is actually way higher.
I remember that. But guess what? Yeah. You know what we have? Here's what we have. You just validated my point I was about to make to you. Here's the point I'm going to make to you is, okay, China, Xi Jinping, right? They say, yeah, COVID came and it left and we're freaking partying our asses up. Well, it's no big deal. We're good. The economy is growing. We're blowing up. People are so happy to be in China. They just love it here. It's a fantastic world. But I tell you, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you're not welcome in China. And if somebody posts a video on any of those platforms, let me tell you, we're coming after you. Why? Jack Ma gets up there and gives a speech, an anti-government speech by this much. He goes missing for 90 days. How the hell does a guy worth $60 billion that created a bunch of jobs disappear? Their Elon Musk disappeared. Their Bezos disappeared just because they made a comment against the government. Moral of the story is the following. You can get up today and talk shit about Biden. You got a job at Fox News and CNN. You can get up there and talk shit about Trump. You definitely have a job at MSNBC. Try getting up there and talk shit about Xi Jinping in China. You have a job at the cemetery and it's 6 feet under. You cannot talk shit over there or in Russia. You don't have that.
That's not true at all, though. That's not true.
Fantastic. So why don't they believe in freedom of speech? Why don't we have Facebook, YouTube, Twitter over there? Why can't we see what's going on? Why don't they go Facebook Live so we can see what's going on in China?
Does China ban as many of these things as they can? Yeah. And should they? Absolutely, they should, right? Would the United States do that? Would the United States ban things like that? No. If there was a massive, hugely funded Chinese effort to spread propaganda in the United States,
TikTok,
would the U.S. ban it?
No, TikTok and Zoom. What else you want to say? TikTok, Zoom. Go to the sites. We have access. I can go to China's YouTube website, they can't go online. I have a sense of the fact that in China, you don't have freedom of speech like we got in America. In America, if you disagree with Trump, you can go out there and talk about it. You cannot do that in China. You cannot do that in the USSR that you love. You can't do that under Stalin. You say one?
No, there's plenty of criticism of Xi Jinping. There's plenty of criticism of the Communist Party.
You think during a Stalin era, I can say things about Stalin and get away with it? Come on, we can't be that naive.
You cannot organize to bring down the state.
Not organize to bring the state.
You're going to have a problem.
What if I just start to behind closed doors campaign and I say, hey, I want to run as an opposition against you and I want to run as a Democrat? You can't do that.
Their red line is, look, you can run against anybody as long as it's in the Communist Party, right?
What an absolute load of garbage. Stalin had Trotsky exiled and then eventually killed because he was a threat to his power. He also oversaw the Great Purge or the Great Terror, where high-level officials were being accused en masse of treason and either sent to gulags or killed. And this also spread throughout the Soviet Union, with factory managers and mid-ranking officers and bureaucrats not spared. In 1937 and 38 alone, over 100,000 Communist Party members were purged, and over half of the military's high command was shot. Everyday citizens were not spared either, with over 650,000 being shot and over 1 million sent to the gulags. And part of the reason why these numbers were so high was because the NKVD had quotas to fill. And a really famous example of someone who was locked up in these gulags was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the author of the Gulag Archipelago, of course. He was put in a gulag for comments that he wrote in a private letter to a friend about Stalin.
Mao. Okay, you said a couple things about Mao. Okay, I'd like to get your take on Mao. So you said you tweeted support for Chinese dictator Mao, describing him as one of the greatest revolutionary leaders of all time. Why don't you unpack it? Because you had good things to say about him. You called him the greatest revolutionary leaders of all time. That meaning ahead of Stalin. Tell me why him.
Well, yeah, Mao is an incredibly important figure, in terms of China, but also in terms of the history of Marxism and communism. Mao treated people very, very fairly because he saw it as like, these are the people that we're actually fighting for, Now, does every leader do that? No, not at all, right? Most guerrilla fighters are incredibly unethical, like they mostly do whatever the hell they want, right? Now, then we could say, what did Mao do when he was in power, right? What Mao did when he was in power is very similar to Stalin, right? He said, we need to get the entire country organized. The state is going to be the major employer, but we're going to do something that's never been done in China, which is we're going to make sure that everyone has the basics, okay? In China, this is called the iron rice bowl, right? It's a bundle of guaranteed consumption goods, okay? That never, ever existed any time in Chinese history, right? So this is among the first things that are done, right? Even while the economy is still emerging from the wreckage of, tens of millions of people died in the fighting, in the invasion of the Japanese and so on, right? Mao immediately turns toward improving the lives of the very poorest, right? These are things that I certainly admire, and I think anybody should admire, right? I mean, like, if you care about the fate of the poor, the fate of those who are the least advantaged in a society, well, this is a leader who put their needs very much, near the top, right?
Now he's really reaching again with this one. To say that he put the needs of the poor near the top is absolutely delusional beyond belief. Just like Stalin, Mao's Great Leap Forward was a way in which to industrialize China, and also meant the collectivization of agricultural lands. And just like the Soviet Union, it caused a terrible famine, but this one was responsible for the deaths of up to 45 million Chinese people. But despite the famine, and like Stalin, Mao continued to export grain whilst his people were suffering and starving, and he also rejected any international aid to save face. Now, those people sound pretty poor to me. I mean, starving to death is as bad as poor as you get, and Mao wasn't too concerned about them now, was he?
I'm curious, just purely out of curiosity, what do you think about Hitler?
Well, Hitler is a fascist monster, somebody who committed genocide, somebody who is a would-be imperialist.
Yeah.
Hitler did not focus his imperialism on Africa as the other capitalist powers did in the late 1800s. He focused his imperialism on Russia, right? I mean, the drive was to go east to give the German people living room, Lebensraum, right? I mean, that was the German phrase. Now, they did that under the understanding that the Slavs and the Russian people were subhuman, you know. Now, they had a little bit of a problem ideologically because, you know, they had a white supremacist ideology, and they did recognize that the Slavs and the Russians were, or at least some of them were white, right? But they used this very old kind of mythological idea that said that the Slavs had black bones. And I mean, it was this just utter bullshit, right? So what you have here is you have fascist nationalism, which seeks to conquer territory based on racist ideology, right? Now, I think that that's pretty well established by history, right? The result of that is that tens of millions of people died, okay? That's unequivocal. Now, people like to draw equivalencies between, anti-communists do, between Hitler and Stalin. There are no equivalencies. Right? None of the things that I mentioned apply in the slightest to the Soviet Union, to any socialist country. They don't apply to China. Saying Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, and then saying something after that, just advertises your ignorance. Right? There's no point in saying anything further at this point.
You crack me up. I'm gonna do a quick speed round with you. I'll give you a name. Tell me one word that comes to mind, and then we'll wrap it up. Any word that comes to mind, or you can say skip with any name. So Churchill.
What's the word that comes to mind with Churchill? I mean, I think of Churchill with the Bengal famine, really, and if we want to look at a leader who intentionally starved people, I think that's who we're looking for. We're not looking at Stalin or Mao. We're looking at Churchill.
But Churchill was essential in defeating those Nazis. I mean, for somebody of your ideological leaning, I really thought that maybe you'd just give Churchill a little bit of props for that one. And blaming Churchill for the Bengal famine is just such a terrible misconstruing of history. This was a famine caused by a typhoon, a natural disaster, and this was also during World War II. And at this time, it was almost impossible to get the supplies needed to Bengal because of the geopolitical issues in that area. So there you have it, guys. A very interesting way to view history and the 20th century. And that is the sort of thinking that will get you into the Cool Kids Club at a university in 2023. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you would like access to uncensored, exclusive content and to join the Rattlesnake TV community and support the channel so that I can bring the best content possible to you as often as possible, then please consider hitting the link in the bio, rattlesnaketv.locals.com, and support the channel. And if you want to watch another clip, click right here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, if you get value from these videos, then click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV.